The classic system craze is still going on strong, and one of the biggest ones to look out for this year that people really hyped up for is the PlayStation Classic. I know I was excited for it because to this day the PS1 is still one of my favorite consoles with an amazing library to pull from, but now that the console is here, it's kind of underwhelming. Don't get me wrong, it has its strengths, but it has its problems too, and something that really highlights this fact to me is that on the same day this came out, for around the same price, I got something that I think celebrates my love of PlayStation much better. These shoes. I get it, this is kind of a bizarre idea and it's not something you can really do a one-to-one comparison with, but trust me, there is a logic and argument to all of this, but first let's take a look at both of these, starting with the Classic. At a first glance, the PlayStation Classic is exactly what you would expect. It's just a little tiny miniature PlayStation, and I think that they did a really good job on that. As far as just the build quality goes, this is a cool little looking replica. Obviously it's not an exact match, the ports are different, you have HDMI, USB for the controllers, but it looks like a little tiny PlayStation, and I appreciate that. There's even some cool little details about it too, like the open button is pressable, and it doesn't actually pop up in the lid. So you might be wondering, well, what exactly does that do? Well, when you're playing games that have multiple discs, like Final Fantasy VII, this is the button you have to hit in order to change discs, which on the one hand sounds kind of annoying, but it happens rarely enough that I think it's just a cool little detail, and I appreciate that. Sadly though, once you've hooked the system up, that's kind of where these details end. Yes, it does kind of recreate the way the PS1's menu looked when you're doing things like messing with the memory cards, but it's just very bare bones and basic looking, and there's not a lot to it. You're picking between different games, and there's a couple little basic settings you can adjust, but that's really it. Something that I really appreciated about the NES and SNES Classics is they felt like something that was a bit of a labor of love. There was lots of little fun details and things that really reached out to fans. They gave you choices for things. You could add scan lines, you could create borders and different backdrops to make up the fact that it's a 4x3 game. None of that is really present here. All the games are in 4x3 with just a black border around everything, and then when you look at the list of games available on it, the whole thing is just kind of, well, awkward. I wouldn't necessarily say that any of the games on there are bad, though some of them have certainly aged much better than others, but when you look at the list of choices and what's not here, there's a lot of games that just don't seem like they necessarily belong, especially if you're only sticking to 20 games. I mean, for instance, Metal Gear Solid and Final Fantasy VII, awesome, makes perfect sense, should be on here. But at the same time, you have stuff like Battle Arena Toshinden or Ridge Racer. But you don't have Gran Turismo or Castlevania Symphony of the Night or even Crash Bandicoot. The fact that this is a PlayStation Classic and doesn't feature a game that basically was the mascot of the system is insane to me. There is a part of me that still thinks that if you are a diehard fan, this is still a pretty cool collectible, because let's be honest, when it comes to a lot of these classic systems, people pick them up and they play them for maybe a week, 2 weeks, go back on occasion, but at the end of the day, it's basically a cool little collectible paperweight. You know, I think if you're a diehard fan and you really just want to collect this because you just love everything PlayStation, then cool, go ahead and grab it. But if you want to actually re-experience and play these old games, this just doesn't really capture that feeling right. You know, compared to what Nintendo has done with the NES and SNES Classic Editions, I think this is something that kind of meets the bare minimum requirements. It has the game on it, it looks like a little system, but there's just not any of the real love behind it. As for the shoes, well, these are the PG2.5 PlayStation shoes from Nike, and we actually covered the older version of these that came out earlier this year, just the regular PG2s, and it's really interesting the shift in design aesthetic they went between these. See, the original PG2s were focused on being the sort of celebration of PlayStation 4 specifically, so the aesthetic was much more focused on this black design with some cuts of blue here and there, and they used the 4 button colors from the PlayStation controller as little accents. On the other hand, with the 2.5s, there's been this decision to go with a much more retro design, going for the gray of the original PlayStation, kind of lining up with what we're talking about with the PlayStation Classic, and the accent colors are actually different. It's not the 4 button colors, but instead, it's the 4 colors that are present in the original PlayStation logo, which some of them are similar and the same, but you also get that kind of orangish yellow and a more kind of hot pink salmon color as opposed to the pink and orange of the buttons. There's also, of course, just the general design changes from the PG2s to 2.5s, and one of the ways that really impacts these shoes specifically is the print design of the 4 PlayStation controller symbols is a lot more heavily present, which I really like. While I wouldn't say either shoe design is bad looking or anything, I definitely think the 2.5 is just this really cool celebration of old school stuff. Like, the 2s were cool, and they're recent, they're more the kind of modern look, but when it comes to just having that like retro love, that's what I think of when you think about how you feel about an old system. It's not what the current trend is, it's where it started from. Though it is worth noting that just like with the 2s, this does have the light up effects, which are a little more reminiscent of the PS4, where you get that nice kind of glowing blue that you can have in a solid color, or this kind of pulsing effect, which is really neat, although I probably shouldn't have it on very often. This is a really interesting form of cross promotion to me, because there's a lot of different stuff that's branded after different video game consoles and things, but this is one where I feel like, you take it with you, and it's something a little nicer than just a t-shirt or a hat or beanie. Shoes have a lot more going into them, and there's an interesting history behind the different times that PlayStation has collaborated in this way. In fact, way back in 2006 was actually their first one with Nike, which was an Air Force One, and it's something they've been really heavy on this last year with the 2.5s, the PG2s I talked about earlier, and then even more recently, at least than the PG2s, was a Air Force design they did during E3 that we also got our hands on, which are also very pretty, but once again, still focused on that PS4 aesthetic. The point I'm trying to make here is that while these are two very different products, ultimately the reason why they're being marketed and why people want to pick them up is the same. You're a PlayStation fan that wants to pick something up that represents your retro love of the system, and the shoes just do a better job of that. The PlayStation Classic is an awesome idea, and if it were done right, I would definitely pick it over the shoes, but the way it's designed right now, it's just the bare minimum. It's just kind of something that was made to capture this kind of craze and nothing beyond that. Whereas the shoes are something that a lot of thought and design went into, and there's just a lot more loving care and craft involved. When you look at them in terms of these differences, it's just night and day.